Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome home.
Yes, in fact, Vancouver was my home and Simon Fraser is my alma mater.
I want to talk a bit about your business in a little while, but mostly what I'm trying to do in this series is get to know what makes people tick who go on to considerable success and create companies and demonstrate leadership. And when I first read your bio, I said to Jessica, this can't all be one person. This has got to be more than one person. Your first job?
Well, my first job was a babysitting job. I worked every day after school when I was 13, babysitting 3 little kids and really, contributing to the family income. We were not a very well-to-do family, and that was my way of doing something for the family.
So did you find that you had a work ethic at the age of 13?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My family are immigrants from Europe, and so we had the immigrant work ethic, and we all worked very hard. And to this day, I think I still work very hard. I don't know how not to.
Is there a different work ethic? People who struggle in another country feel they can or will give up everything they may have and take the kind of plunge that it must take to go and start a new life in another country?
I think so. I think that what happens is that you just so realize how much you have to accomplish and to achieve and how much you've left behind. And of course, I think that the family itself, my parents worked very hard because they wanted to achieve something for us and bring us to a place where we could succeed and have a better life. So seeing that as an example really, I think made us feel like we had to do our part for the family as well. So
from babysitting, you went on to?
I worked as a cashier. In fact, worked as a cashier for London Drugs in North Vancouver for a number of years. And then when I was in between law school and university, I think my entrepreneurial spirit started coming out. My sister and I started a bathing suit business. All of these people here are way too young to remember crocheted bathing suits. But I remember watching my grandmother crochet doilies or something and had the idea, why not crochet a bathing suit? So we actually put an ad in the newspaper and hired a bunch of older women who stayed home and crocheted, and they crocheted bathing suits for us, which we then took on the road and sold over the course of the summer to make some money before we went back to university.
And did you make some money?
We made a little bit. Can't say we made a lot. Our cost of sales was higher than we expected. Our quality control wasn't that good. We had some grandmothers who crocheted better than other grandmothers, and so we had a little bit of a learning curve, but it was interesting.
I'm trying to get my head around the idea of a crocheted bathing suit. It would seem to have a certain appeal to men. Did women take to it readily?
It depends on how tightly knit the crocheted bathing suit was, which is part of the quality control problem.
Now, you said you went to Simon Fraser University.
I did. I studied psychology. When I was 12 years old, somebody asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I said I wanted to help people. And they said, oh, well, you want to be a social worker. And so I said, oh, I guess I want to be a social worker. And so then I evolved from social work to psychology. But on my first day at Simon Fraser, I declared my major as psychology and studied psychology and education for 4 years at Simon Fraser. Great experience.
How has it impacted what you do now? And we'll get to a little bit to what you do now, although I'm not sure we can cover it all in an hour. But was studying psychology, integral to the type of business person and leader you turned out to be?
It's hard to know whether or not it was the education itself, but I do feel that I am very intuitive and I do have very good people skills. And it may be that part of that came from my study of psychology and part of it just might have been, intuitive or inherent in who I am.
So how did you go from that into the kinds of businesses that you're in today? And the thing that struck me when I looked at your bio was the diversity of what you're involved in, and I thought about it again when I looked out the window and I saw a Subway right across the street. So Subway restaurants are just one of the things that you've been heavily involved with recently.
Yeah, so what happened is after I graduated from Simon Fraser in psychology, I was going to go to grad school. And I took a year off, did some research with one of my professors, and I worked in a clinic for emotionally disturbed children. I was interested in child psychopathology. And so I did that for about 4 months, and I realized I didn't like it, which was quite devastating. From the age of 12, I thought I wanted to do this, and all of a sudden I didn't. So I remember going home that day just devastated and thinking, what am I going to do now? And I had coincidentally run into a friend who had studied or who had just been accepted into law school. So I got home and I said to my mom, I'm devastated. I think that I don't like psychology after all. And my mom, being ever so practical, instead of putting her arms around me saying, oh my God, you must feel terrible, she said, well, what are you going to do instead? So I said, I'm going to go to law school. So I ended up going to law school, and I ended up getting really an education in how to think, and that led me into business.
Isn't that funny? Because I went to school with a fellow who went to law school, went all the way through, graduated, and never practiced law. By the time he finished law school, he knew he didn't want to be a lawyer.
I actually really enjoyed being a lawyer, and it actually is a helping profession, which was not unlike what I wanted to do when I was growing up. I had a really great career. I practiced with Russell Dumoulin at the end, and then left Russell Dumoulin and went to Shaw Communications as their general counsel. And I was the first lawyer that Shaw had hired and developed the legal department for Shaw, ultimately became a senior vice president, and started doing less legal and more transactional work, more mergers and acquisitions. And that led me to really business. And so I had done mergers and acquisitions when I was a lawyer with Russell Dumoulin, but really just learned so much from Shaw. We did $15 billion worth of transactions when I was at Shaw.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why did you leave?
I left after about 10 years. I'd reached really the pinnacle of my career, and had a conversation with Jim Shaw and sort of mutually agreed that it was the right time for me to go. And when I was leaving, I was looking at what was my next step going to be, and I was interested in really becoming or doing advisory work. So what I'd seen when I was at Shaw was that the investment bankers got paid the big bucks. The lawyers did all the hard work. But it was much more fun for me doing the structuring and the negotiating than really doing the legal side of it. And I was fortunate in that I had moved into doing more of that work. So I had anticipated doing, setting up almost like a boutique investment bank and doing advisory work. And so I started doing that and got the opportunity to invest in a radio broadcasting business, which was my first investment.
Was that Vista?
That's Vista Radio.
And one thing that seems consistent in your biog is that when you invest in something, you tend to grow it. Vista, you tell me the numbers, but they went from a very small number of stations to, 65 now?
Yeah, we went from one station in 2005 to 64 today.
That's remarkable growth. The same thing with Subway, from 200 and some odd stores to 400. This, I found out just reading this week, that there are more Subways than there are Tim Hortons or McDonald's in BC at least.
That's correct. That's correct. We actually went from about 600 Subways to 750. Before Subway, I was involved in Domino's, which I have since sold. And in Domino's, we went from about 240 to 400 today. I
want to find out when we come back how hands-on you are with each of those enterprises and how you find people to work with you on them. More with Margot Micallef right after this. She with Bill Good on the Chorus Radio Network. Talking with the CEO, Margot Micallef, and before the break I was mentioning that I was particularly interested in a couple of things. First of all, virtually everything that you've touched has grown. How have you done that? What's the secret to growing the number of Subway stores, for example, at a time when the economy is pretty tough and a lot of even small restaurants, we talked about it with the HST issue a few minutes ago, a lot of small restaurants closed?
So the first thing we did was we actually attacked the profitability of our franchisees. So there was a lot of discounting that was going on in the market as a way of growing revenue. So we stopped looking at just the top line and really started focusing on the bottom line. So as soon as the franchisees became profitable, they then had the wherewithal and the interest and the capability to open more locations. So we had this demand that was pent up at that point in time. We then looked at our own resources. So the company had been growing by somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 20 locations per year. And we looked at our resources in terms of how could we grow more. And there wasn't any particular reason to want to grow more other than it was possible. And a friend of mine has accused me of adding zeros, and that's kind of how I look at the world. So we got together as an organization and we said, what do we need to change within our own infrastructure to be able to grow faster? And so we streamlined the operation. We looked at how long it took everyone to do their particular role, whether it was, leasing or permitting or building. And we identified what it should take everyone to do that. And we had everybody report then to one person who kept track of how long everything took. And as soon as you give people a deadline, they abide by it. It wasn't like anybody said, I can't do a lease within that period of time, but if we didn't tell them what our expectation was in terms of how long we thought it ought to take them, it sometimes would just take months because nobody had any expectations. So the first thing we did was increase profitability of the franchisees, create demand for more locations, and then change the way we operated so that we could actually accommodate that greater growth.
Do you worry about having too many?
Yes and no. I mean, we always worry about the profitability of our franchisees. We don't think we're anywhere near saturation at this point in time, and we monitor that fairly closely.
Does picking a franchisee, is it different from hiring any other employee in terms of the kind of character, the kind of just the kind of person that you're looking for?
Not really. What we're looking for was always people who are self-starters, who are passionate, who are dedicated, who work hard. And, our franchisee base are just tremendous in that respect. They all do work very hard. They have their vested interest is to succeed for the benefit of their family. Many of our franchisees are new Canadians, much like my family was. And so they have that immigrant work ethic. And, frankly, we look for the same sort of character within our employees.
Do most of them, the franchisees, have more than one franchise?
A fair number do. In Alberta, the greater proportion have more than one franchise. In BC, it's pretty well even right now.
I want to talk to you about the issue of leadership, because it's been my experience that in life that there are a relatively small number of people who are really, really good leaders. There are a lot of good 2ICs. And I use the political example. A lot of people thought that Paul Martin would be a good Prime Minister. And I talked to a CEO on my trip who said, no, he was a good 2IC. So is there something that makes a good leader?
I think you have to be really bossy. And I mean that in the nicest way. I grew up in a family of 6 kids. And I was really bossy. My mom is a very strong woman. She was my role model. And I think that's where I got my training for leadership. I don't know exactly whether you're born a leader, whether you are taught to be a leader, but I've always had leadership skills and always wanted to, and I shouldn't say wanted, but always did take the lead on things. So I think some of it is being courageous, not being afraid to speak my mind. When in school, when they asked for volunteers, I was often the first one to volunteer. So I think you set an example. And, my mom used to say that to me when we were growing up, that you're the example for your brothers and sisters. So I think I just really internalized that. Second oldest, okay. Oldest daughter.
Okay. Bossy, you give advice readily, I'm sure. Do you take advice? Do you listen to people who work with you and for you?
I do. I'm actually very collaborative in my approach. So usually when we have a major decision to make, I call together all of the people that are necessary to make that decision. And I listen a lot. So oftentimes I will just sit and watch the dynamics in the room and watch the people talking amongst each others and arguing. And, I will interject and I'll say something and I'll direct, the conversation and make sure it stays on topic. But I tend to listen a lot. And then at the end, I see the path very, very clearly of what we need to do.
How do you keep your handle on so many different things? I mean, I think there's a big difference between running a radio station and running a subway.
Yes and no. The very first thing, and I think the thing that I am actually the best at, is gathering together very good people. So the very first thing I do is develop a very strong team and really work closely with that team, really insist that everyone in that team do their job and do their role and be available. I also have an incredible 2IC at Oliver Capital who really does keep me organized. Her name is Ginger Ford, and she's my director of operations. And I delegate a fair bit to her just in terms of keeping me organized, and that helps a lot. She used to be a sergeant in the Army, and believe me, she's very bossy.
We're grateful to her for fitting us into your schedule.
Yes, exactly.
It was a challenge, but it was one well worth taking. What about the radio business? I mean, you've grown it from 1 to 65 stations, and if I'm not mistaken, they're small market stations.
Yes. Our strategy is small market. It's a little bit different strategy than operating radio in large markets like Vancouver. You know, my attitude in life has been to make a difference, and I actually see in all of the businesses that I'm involved in that I can make a difference. So with Subway, we make a difference in the lives of our franchisees and in the lives of the people who work for our businesses. Since we've been operating Subway, we've grown the employee base by 1,500 people. To 7,500 people who work in a Subway franchise in British Columbia and Alberta.
Wow.
Yeah. With Vista, it's the same thing. We make a real difference in the lives of the communities that we serve. Local radio in small markets is really appreciated. In many of our markets, there's no daily newspaper and there's no local television. So we are the glue that really keeps the community together. And we integrate ourselves into the fabric of the community to make sure that they have a voice, that they hear each other, they connect with each other, you know, that they can connect and speak to each other in a way that's meaningful.
Talking with Margot Micallef, we are at the Beedie School of Business in downtown Vancouver. You're with Bill Good on the Chorus Radio Network, and we will be back with more right after this. Talking with Margot Micallef, who is the latest in our Chief Executives series, but we try to be pretty personal. Oh, where did you go? Where was the young woman? Get back up there at that microphone. We've encouraged people here at the Beedie School of Business to ask questions of our CEOs. Hi.
Hi, I'm Josephine. I'm also a proud SFU alumni like you are. So I read Canadian Business Magazine that you have a quotation. I really like it. You say life is a game of recovery. So I would like to know 2 questions. So how do you manage your time so well that you can wear so many hats at one time? And my second question will be, what is your core value that you strongly believe to make you so successful today?
So in terms of time, you know, I think that I just do the best I can with the time that I have available. And, you know, I think I'm the opposite of the old adage, which is that time or work expands to fill the time available. I think that in my case, I compress it to fill the time available. So, you know, I have a really good team of people around me in the various businesses, and I work really closely with them. I work long hours. I really enjoy business, and I get a lot of fulfillment from it. So I don't feel it's work. You know, if I open up my computer after dinner, or if I'm doing something on the weekend, or, you know, when I talk, my sweetheart is also in business, and we talk business a lot, you know, and I share my ideas and concerns with him and with my son and with my friends. And so it's just really a part of my life. You know, I don't think I turn it off and do something different. It's just, you know, really integrated with what I do. In terms of, you know, I guess my attitude towards life to be successful, you know, I never go into a situation thinking that I won't be successful. And I don't mean in that I feel arrogant or egotistical about it. It's just a matter-of-fact approach in my life. You know, I was joking with somebody recently that when we started Vista Radio, we had no money and we had no radio stations to buy. But we, not for a minute, doubted that we were going to be successful at it. And you know, as you heard the story. So I think it's just really an attitude of being very success-focused and not anticipating that there's any other option other than success. And then, you know, to go to your quote or the comment you made that you read in the Canadian Business, I'm not afraid of mistakes. I do believe that life is a game of recovery. So I don't wait to have all of the answers before I take a step. I will take a step. And if I need to change course partway through, then I will change course partway through. I'm not afraid to take that risk.
Jim Treliving said much the same thing, and you've got a lot in common in that you're moving into Ontario. He failed when they tried to move Boston Pizza into Ontario, and they're going to go back, he said. But it was interesting because we don't think of it as being a different culture. And yet he said from a business point of view, it is a different culture. Have you researched Ontario and to see how it's different from BC and Alberta?
You know, I think, in fact, all three provinces are different. Starting with Alberta, which to me is probably the most different of the three provinces that you mentioned. I find the work ethic in Alberta to be especially strong, the entrepreneurial spirit in Alberta to be very much alive and blossoming. And, you know, just the attitude being very upbeat. BC is a little bit different. I find, well, a friend of mine made a comment to me once that if you see people in Calgary walking at 6 a.m., they're walking to work. He said, if you see people walking in Vancouver at 6 a.m., they're strolling Stanley Park. And, you know, that's not a disparaging comment. I think it's just the reality that there is a lifestyle difference between BC and Alberta, and definitely a different work ethic.
There's also a different work style, and that was one of the points he made, was he said, if we went out for dinner here, it would probably be 7 o'clock. He said, there, shift workers are getting off at 5 o'clock, and you've got to gear your business for the differences.
In Alberta.
In Ontario.
Yeah. Well, it's not that dissimilar in Alberta, where you have a lot of, you know, again, shift work, a lot of people who are transient, who will go up north and then come back into, you know, Calgary or Edmonton. Ontario, I probably know a little bit less about Ontario in that we've just expanded into Ontario. I find that it's a later lifestyle. You know, people don't go to work that early in the morning. Generally speaking, you know, I don't have appointments before, you know, 9:30. 9 o'clock would be considered early in many respects. But people are out really late at night. You know, I mean, we go out for dinner at 8 or 9 o'clock, and the restaurants are busy at that time.
Another thing that happens is half the population leaves town on Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. Yeah, everybody's going up north, you know, or going to cottage country, which is great because that's where our radio stations are. Many of them are in cottage country, so, you know, that's wonderful that we've got a great population of Torontonians going north to listen to us.
More with Margot Micallef right after this. I mentioned earlier that you've grown your businesses through a pretty tough economy. How closely do you try to measure the economic conditions, and to what degree do you try to forecast what the next 3 to 5 years is going to look like?
You know, I'll look at that. I'm not swayed by it. You know, a lot of times franchisees or, you know, some of our employees in the subway world will use the economy as an excuse if, you know, we have a bad week. And, you know, my attitude is if everything we do is just based on how well the economy is going, why do I have you here? So, you know, it's interesting, but I'm not swayed by it. Do
you set goals for your franchisees? Do they have targets that they have to meet to maintain their franchise?
No, we don't have anything like that. We do encourage franchisees who are not successful to sell their franchise, though, because it can't be pleasurable to be working in it if you're not doing well at it.
I think most of the people listening today, and certainly the people here at the Beedie School of Business, will be a bit gobsmacked at the number of things that you're involved in. You say you enjoy working, you like to work. Would people describe you as a workaholic?
You know, yes and no. Workaholic has a negative connotation, and it also means, I think, that your life is out of balance, and I don't believe my life is out of balance. So I enjoy work, and I work a lot, but I take time for family. I spent the weekend skiing with my partner and some friends of our children. And, you know, take time to visit my family in the United States, visit my mom in town here. My son goes to school here. I come here once a month to see him. I think what being an entrepreneur has allowed me to do is schedule my time and my life so that I can find time to do things that I find enjoyable.
What's a typical day for you?
Well, I get up fairly early. I get up, you know, usually around 5:30 or so. I try to have some quiet time in the morning. I call it meditation. People who meditate probably wouldn't call it that.
At home?
At home, yeah. So I spend time, I make my cup of tea, and then I spend some quiet time just contemplating my day, my life. I try to be grateful every day for everything I have, starting with my fantastic son. And, you know, and then I get dressed. I oftentimes will work out in the mornings. I love to run, so if I can, I'll go outside to run. I hate running on the treadmill, but I will do it if I have to. And then I usually, if I have calls early in the morning with the East, I tend to take those calls at home, usually in my workout gear. Thank God I don't use Skype. And then I'll go to the office, and then it'll usually be a lineup of people at my door, and just one thing after another, oftentimes phone calls, meetings, people kind of getting everybody organized. Then when everybody leaves at 5 o'clock or so, I kind of feel like, oh, thank goodness, now I can get to my list of to-dos. And I usually stay there until about 7 o'clock at night.
Does Ginger stay with you?
She often does stay with me, yeah. And, the great thing about Ginger is that she's accessible, pretty well 24/7. She's not available on Saturdays. That's her religious day, and I respect that. But, oftentimes when I'm emailing at 1 or 2 in the morning, I'll get a reply from her. So,
what about the people that you work with? What are your expectations of them? Do you expect them to be available 24 hours?
Yes and no. I respect family time. So if they tell me that they're with their family, I respect that. I'm not like some CEOs that frighten people into being accessible. I think everybody that I work with really does enjoy their job and does realize that business goes outside of business hours. And so I'm not ever surprised when I email people at whatever time of day or night I happen to be working if I get a response from them. I wouldn't say I necessarily expect it, but I'm not surprised when I get it.
What about technology and social media? To what degree has that either changed your life or enhanced your ability to do your job?
I think it's enhanced the ability to do my job because it means that I can I have a BlackBerry and I'm very fast on it.
Did you turn it off?
It's not off, but the ringer's not on,
okay.
But you'll see the light is flashing. So it does allow me to access my office or be available to people even when I'm not in the office. I did take some time off last Friday to go skiing, and I did take a peek at my BlackBerry on the chairlift as often as I could.
They are addictive, aren't they?
They are addictive, but addictive is it's got a negative connotation. I actually find them very useful. I think that where we go wrong with our BlackBerry is, and I was very much guilty of this when my son was growing up, is feeling compelled to always look at it. So, what I try to do now is I set time aside if I'm with family to go and look at my BlackBerry. When I was on holidays recently, I looked at it in the morning, I looked at it in the middle of the day, and I looked at it in the evening. And I was still able to keep, things flowing.
Where did you go on holiday?
Turks and Caicos.
Nice.
It was very nice.
So you will do that from time to time?
Absolutely.
For how long?
Well, Turks and Caicos, we went for 7 days. I just actually, for my birthday, my partner took me to Italy, and we actually went for an extended weekend. So we left on a Wednesday night and came back on a Monday. So we went skiing for 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Thank goodness I adapt really well to different time zones.
Now, I'm presuming that Ginger warned you that we have what I call our Vanity Fair questions.
Yes, I've been warned.
We will be back with that right after this. You're with Bill Good on the Chorus Radio Network. Talking with CEO Margot Micallef. We've established, I think, that you've got some balance in your life. You go skiing, you go to the Turks and Caicos Islands. Do you read?
I do read. I read a lot.
What do you read?
I read mainly biographies and autobiographies and things about business, leadership, and just ways to succeed in business.
Why are you reading that? You should be writing.
I actually have aspirations to write, but I don't have time right now.
If you could have dinner with any 4 people, living or dead, who would they be and why?
So going back to my belief that the point in life is to make a difference, I chose 4 people that I would invite for dinner who I believe made a difference in the world, but who were ordinary people who made an extraordinary difference. So the first one is my grandfather, who I never met. His name is Joseph Micallef. He was in the first parliament in Malta. He died just before the Second World War. But when he was in Parliament, he became the Minister of Agriculture for Malta. Now, Malta is a very small island country in the Mediterranean, and it was very highly dependent on third parties for food, and they imported everything. So when he was Minister of Agriculture, he introduced agricultural techniques and a particular breed of hog that would do well in Malta. And during the Second World War, Malta was blockaded and severely attacked by the Axis, and it was a very important strategic military base for the Allies. And they were able to sustain themselves in part because of what my grandfather had taught them or brought into the country while he was Minister of Agriculture.
It's fascinating, but I was just thinking what a shame that you never met him.
No, I never met him, but my grandmother kept him alive and, very much a part of our lives. So I do feel that we, were exposed to him.
Who's number two?
Number two is Viola Desmond. She was an African-Canadian woman, a hairdresser, well-educated, but ran a business in Nova Scotia and wanted to watch a movie one day and bought a ticket, sat in the main area of the theater, which was had been segregated for whites only. She was asked to leave and move to the balcony, which was the area that was designated for African Canadians. She refused. She was arrested, jailed, and then fined. And she appealed her conviction and lost, but this is 1946, a full 10 years before Rosa Parks in the United States did what she did and really brought attention to segregation laws. Viola Desmond was able to at least draw attention to racism in Canada in a way that others had not been able to before. And that kind of courage just really inspires me.
The third person.
The third person is Jim Abbott. He's retired now, a major league pitcher. But what made him so unique is that he was born without a right hand. And he had aspirations to be a pitcher and joined the major leagues in 1989, played for the Yankees, California Angels, a couple of other teams as well. And he had a technique where he would rest his mitt on his stump, pitch the ball and put the mitt on his left hand and be able to field the ball in the same amount of time that it took an able-bodied player. And again, here's somebody who never let any sort of affliction take him off course of his dream. And so I really admire that and find that really inspiring.
And number four?
Number four is actually a tie, and I couldn't make up my mind between Ray Kroc, who was the founder of the McDonald's franchise chain, who really was the father of franchising, and Roy Thompson, who is, of course, an incredible businessman, but who had a number of failures before he had a success. And what I admire about Roy Thompson was that he had a job in North Bay, Ontario, selling radios, but couldn't succeed at it because there were no radio stations for his customers to listen to. And so he went out and got a radio broadcasting license on March 3rd, my birthday, 1931, so many years before I was born, thankfully. Didn't let the fact that there wasn't a radio station impede his desire to succeed in business. And the irony is that Vista Radio now, our largest shareholder, is the Thompson family. And we have a radio station in North Bay.
And they own the Jets, don't they?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they do. Do you set goals? Do you have a 3-year, 5-year plan for Margot?
That's a good question. My attitude is I think I would just keep doing more of the same. My son is in his last year of university. He wants to work with me, for which I'm very grateful, when he finishes. So my anticipation is that I would probably slow down a little bit, delegate more things to him, but continue to do what I'm doing, really, continuing to buy and sell and grow businesses.
You think you can relegate things to your son?
I do. I absolutely do. I actually do delegate a fair bit. It doesn't mean that I'm not involved, but I do let people do their job.
It has been a great pleasure having you here, and I thank you, especially recognizing your schedule and your travel and everything else, that you were able to come and share your time with us.
It's my privilege. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Margot Micallef.